World War II ended, and American intelligence agencies faced a new problem. The US had seen what Nazi doctors and Japan's wartime researchers had done to prisoners, experiments that treated people like tools. Officials condemned the cruelty, but they also studied the results and the methods. A hard idea took hold. The enemy had tried to weaponize the human mind. If the next war was ideological, then psychology mattered. In the scramble to understand, interrogation stopped looking like a simple exchange of questions and answers. It started looking like a contest of pressure, fear, and control. Analysts asked what broke resistance, what shaped memory, what forced compliance. The language shifted from morality to strategy. Coercion became something to measure, not something to forbid. What had been presented as unthinkable during the war began to look, in private, like a capability to build. That decision changed the direction of research inside the national security world. Instead of drawing a clear line after the atrocities, planners treated them as warning signs and as clues. They believed the next enemy would not just shoot or bomb, but manipulate, recruit, and extract secrets. Psychological warfare and harsh interrogation techniques were no longer viewed as crimes to avoid. They were treated as necessities to master, before someone else mastered them first. The Cold War hardened into a daily contest of fear and influence. Then came reports that sounded like a new kind of weapon. American officials heard stories of prisoners who returned home praising their captors, rejecting their own country, or seeming mentally altered. The word used for it was simple and terrifying: brainwashing. Whether the stories were true, exaggerated, or misunderstood mattered less than the reaction they triggered. CIA leaders treated them as proof the enemy had found a way to reach inside the mind. The reports pointed again and again to the Soviet Union and to Communist China as places where interrogation looked less like questioning and more like reshaping a person. Officials worried about soldiers, spies, even diplomats. If an opponent could break someone without leaving bruises, then every capture became a strategic risk. And if that opponent could plant false beliefs, extract secrets, or force confessions on command, the damage could spread far beyond one prisoner. The threat was not just information loss, it was control. Inside the CIA, that fear produced a hard conclusion. The United States had to learn how such control might work and how to defend against it. That meant moving beyond traditional interrogation, beyond propaganda, and into experiments aimed at behavior itself. The question shifted from what a person knew to what a person could be made to do. Could memory be disrupted? Could loyalty be rewritten? Could resistance be collapsed? In the logic of the moment, refusing to explore those possibilities felt like surrender. In 1953, the CIA stopped treating behavior control research as scattered experiments and turned it into a formal program. It launched Project MKUltra as an umbrella that could cover many different lines of work at once. The goal sounded simple on paper: find reliable ways to influence, control, or change human behavior. But the method was structural. If the work stayed divided, it stayed visible. If it became one hidden program, it became protected. The person placed in charge was Sidney Gottlieb, a CIA chemist who oversaw the project's direction and its secrecy. Under him, MKUltra did not operate like a single laboratory with a single plan. It acted like a funding engine. Money moved into sub-projects, each labelled and managed in pieces, so few people saw the whole picture. Coordination became the advantage. So did confusion. When responsibility scattered, denial became easier. MKUltra also solved a practical problem: concealment. The program gave the agency a way to support research while keeping the CIA's name out of it, and to route approvals through controlled channels. Paper trails grew thin by design. Oversight weakened, not by accident, but by architecture. By the end of 1953, a new reality existed inside the agency. Behavior control research moved forward as a protected system, built to expand and built to hide. MKUltra did not stay inside secure facilities. It moved into ordinary life. Under the program, LSD became a central tool because it could disrupt perception fast and unpredictably. People were dosed without warning, then watched for reactions as if shock itself proved something. The point was not therapy. It was control. Each test treated a human mind like a switchboard, and surprise became part of the method. Researchers and contractors tested different drugs, different amounts, and different combinations, looking for patterns they could repeat. They tracked confusion, panic, compliance, and memory gaps as measurable results. Consent slowed everything down, so it was removed. Subjects often had no idea they had been used until long after, if ever. What looked like a normal day became an experiment, and the experiment carried real psychological cost. Because the dosing happened without warning, the outcomes were chaotic, and that chaos was recorded as data. Some people broke down, some became paranoid, disoriented, or unable to trust their own senses. The program treated those injuries as acceptable risk, not as harm that ended a test. MKUltra's drug work showed a new rule taking hold. If fear and confusion produced useful information, then suffering counted as a variable. After the drug experiments, the program widened. It no longer relied on chemicals alone to shake someone's grip on reality. Researchers tested what happened when the brain lost its normal anchors: light, sound, time, routine, other people. Sensory deprivation and forced isolation became tools used to strip away stability and measure what remained. The goal stayed the same: find pressure points, then record the results as if distress behaved like a predictable reaction. Hypnosis entered the mix as another way to probe control, not as stage trickery, but as a method to see whether suggestion could override memory, judgment, or resistance. Experiments paired techniques together: deprivation followed by questioning, isolation followed by drugs, confusion followed by commands, because combinations seemed to produce cleaner compliance. Each round aimed for something the agency valued: repeatable outcomes. A person's fear or collapse stopped being a human emergency and became a data point. This approach slowly reshaped the entire effort into what some called interrogation science. Suffering got translated into charts, protocols, and timing. How long to keep someone alone, when to interrupt sleep, how to intensify disorientation, when to offer relief and attach it to cooperation. It sounded clinical, but the effect stayed brutal. The closer they came to a method, the easier it became to use it again on more subjects with less hesitation and with fewer questions asked. MKUltra did not run like a single lab with a sign on the door. It moved through safe houses and middlemen, built to keep the CIA's name off the work. Money travelled in layers, passing through friendly organisations and quiet partners, then landing in projects that looked ordinary on paper. Each step added distance, and distance did something important. It made risky experiments feel routine. These cutouts turned a direct order into a chain of paperwork. A researcher received a grant, not a mission. A university office processed funds, not questions. A hospital unit supported a study, not an intelligence program. Responsibility scattered across the system, so no single person felt fully accountable. That was the point. When harm happened, it became easy to say it was someone else's problem. Safe houses completed the pipeline. They offered controlled spaces where subjects could be watched, dosed and tested without the protections that came with real oversight. What happened there stayed separate from official records, and secrecy did the rest. Over time, the method hardened into habit. Ethics stopped being a barrier and became a technical obstacle. The program did not just hide wrongdoing, it trained people to accept it. By 1953, the experiments did not just produce notes and charts, they produced casualties. People dosed without warning suffered panic, paranoia, and lasting psychological damage, sometimes after a single session. Some researchers and officials began to sense the danger. The question was no longer whether the methods worked, but what they did to the human beings used as test subjects. The harm stopped being theoretical. It became immediate. One case became the most notorious. Frank Olson, a U.S. Army scientist connected to the same covert world, received LSD without his knowledge during a CIA-linked gathering. In the days that followed, he unraveled. He grew frightened, unstable, and desperate for help, while colleagues tried to contain the situation and limit what he could say. Then Olson died after falling from a hotel window. The death set off internal alarm and quiet panic. A death like that should have forced a reckoning. Instead, it pushed the program deeper underground. The response favored protection of the project over protection of people. Sensitive details got restricted, access tightened, and the circle of those who knew shrank. Risk became something to manage, not a reason to stop. MKUltra persisted, and the lesson taken from disaster was not restraint. The lesson was secrecy. By the 1960s, MKUltra did not stay neatly inside a hidden program. Pieces of it traveled. Techniques that once sat in small, deniable experiments started showing up as practical advice for interrogators and detention planners. The mindset shifted with them. If a method produced compliance, it started looking like a tool, not a transgression. The question became what worked fastest, not what crossed a line. Inside government systems, that mattered. Training materials, informal guidance, and professional habits treated stress as something that could be managed and applied, like pressure on a machine. Isolation, exhaustion, disorientation, humiliation, and fear were no longer just abuses someone might commit. They were discussed as options. Once coercion sounded technical, it sounded safer. And once it sounded safer, more people used it without stopping to ask why. The result was a culture, not a single policy. Coercion became easier to justify because it was framed as controlled, measured, and necessary. Oversight lagged behind practice, and secrecy protected the people who pushed limits. Detainees became problems to solve, not humans to protect. And when methods spread across agencies, responsibility blurred. It felt operational. It felt normal. That was the most dangerous change. In the 1970s, the silence around MKUltra finally started to crack. Public distrust in government grew, and investigators began pulling at old threads inside the intelligence world. A key moment came when a sweeping internal order led to the destruction of many CIA records tied to the program. That decision mattered later. When questions arrived, the paper trail had already been burned away. Congressional investigations followed, including the Church Committee, and later hearings that tried to map what had been done in the name of national security. Witnesses described drug experiments, hidden funding, and research that treated people as tools. But again and again, the same problem blocked progress. Files were missing, names were absent, projects were reduced to code numbers with no supporting documents. What reached the public was real but incomplete. Fragments of memos, scattered financial records, and a handful of testimonies sketched an outline of something much larger. That gap shaped everything that came after. Without full documentation, prosecutors struggled, victims struggled, and lawmakers struggled to pin responsibility on specific individuals. Exposure happened. Full accountability never did. Decades later, MKUltra remained less a single experiment than a warning label. It showed how easily the word science became a shield. When fear of enemies drove the agenda, brutal ideas sounded practical. Techniques were described as research, not cruelty. Subjects became data points, not people. And once that language settled in, harm started to look like a step in a procedure. That shift mattered more than any one file. National security urgency did the rest. If the threat felt endless, then the methods felt justified, even when they broke the basic rules of consent. Pain, confusion, isolation, and drugging were treated like controllable inputs, as if suffering could be measured into a reliable result. But the promise never arrived. What spread instead was a toolkit, repeatable ways to pressure, weaken, and disorient, stamped with an official clinical tone. That contrast stayed at the center of MKUltra's legacy. The post-war era promised modern science would protect people and improve life. Here it did the opposite. Research without consent left injuries that outlasted the program itself, trauma, mistrust, and a public sense that institutions could hide behind expertise. The case showed a hard truth. When secrecy met scientific branding, torture did not need rage, it only needed a method.